Get the information you need on financial value transparency and gainful employment reporting, featuring David Musser, Deputy Director, Policy Implementation and Oversight, and Glenn Siyum, Management and Program Analyst, National Student Loan Data System.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on financial value transparency and gainful employment reporting. We're so glad you chose to join us for this session. We know this topic is complicated and it's generated many questions from institutions across the country. So in this presentation, we hope to provide a much more detailed look at the requirements that are most important to schools right now, namely the reporting and completers list requirements. So without further ado, let's get going. In this session, we'll be covering quite a lot, so let's walk through the agenda quickly before we start. First, we'll provide a short overview of the overall requirements for financial value transparency and gainful employment, FVT for short, and then we'll take a deep dive into the data elements you'll be reporting. I'll be discussing some of the student level data that you'll report, and then I'll hand it off to Glenn, who will take you through the program level reporting requirements. Then she'll go through the reporting process in NSLDS and describe the FVT reports that are available to you to help identify the individuals on whom you'll report. And finally, she will discuss the process of evaluating completers lists and provide some resources that we hope will be helpful to you as you complete this process this year. Along the way, we'll also be answering a number of frequently asked questions that we've received from the community in each of these areas. So let's start with an overview of the FVT regulations and discuss how reporting fits into the larger context of these new requirements. These regulations were published on October 10th, 2023, and generally became effective on July 1st, 2024, although certain provisions related to the program information website, acknowledgement requirements, and warning requirements will be implemented later, starting in July of 2026. We won't discuss those latter requirements in this presentation, and we'll focus on the things that you need to know right now about reporting and evaluating completers lists. Now, there are two components to the regulations: financial value transparency and gainful employment. The financial value transparency requirements apply to nearly all programs, including both GE and eligible non-GE programs. Remember that GE programs include all non-degree programs and most programs at proprietary institutions. Eligible non-GE programs include associate's, bachelor's, and graduate degree programs at nonprofit and public institutions. And for the purposes of these regulations, we define a program as the combination of a 6-digit classification of instructional programs, or SIP, code, and a credential level such as bachelor's degree or associate's degree. The financial value transparency regulations describe the process for calculating the two metrics that are the foundation for this framework: the debt to earnings rates and the earnings premium measures. I'll explain how those metrics are calculated in just a moment. The financial value transparency regulations also establish the reporting requirements, the process for evaluating completers lists, the process that the department will use for providing consumer information to the public about these metrics, and requirements for student acknowledgments of negative program information when non-degree programs or graduate degree programs fail one or both of the metrics. The second component of the new rule is the program accountability framework, which applies only to GE programs. For GE programs, we will use debt to earnings rates and earnings premium measures to determine whether the programs prepare students for gainful employment. GE programs that fail one of the metrics in 2 out of 3 consecutive years will become ineligible for Title IV aid. As part of the GE requirements, institutions will also be required to provide warnings to current and prospective students enrolling in programs that are at risk of losing eligibility. Institutions will also be required to certify to the department that their GE programs meet eligibility requirements, similar to past versions of the GE rule. The GE accountability framework can be found in Subpart S of Part 668 in the regulations. Now, as I mentioned, there are 2 metrics that are calculated as part of the financial value transparency regulations. The debt to earnings rates measure the debt burden by looking at the share of income that's needed for program completers to eventually make loan payments several years after graduation. And it includes annual and discretionary measures, which I'll explain in just a moment. It's important to note that the amount of debt used in the calculation is capped at institutional charges minus institutional grants and scholarships. And that's a big reason that we need data on institutional grants and scholarships that your students receive. The earnings premium is actually quite a bit simpler. It will measure a program's earnings by comparing program completers' median annual earnings to an earnings threshold. The threshold is set at the median earnings for working adults aged 25 to 34 with only a high school diploma, either in the state where the institution is located or nationally if less than 50% of the students in the program are from that state. FSA will make that determination using address information that students provide on the FAFSA. The department will calculate two different types of debt-to-earnings rates for each program, an annual earnings rate and a discretionary earnings rate. The annual earnings rate measures completers' annual loan payment amount divided by completers' median annual earnings. If that result is less than or equal to 8%, the program passes the debt-to-earnings metric. The discretionary earnings rate looks at whether borrowers can afford to repay their student debt after covering basic living expenses. And to determine discretionary income, we start with the median annual earnings, then subtract an amount equal to 150% of the federal poverty guideline. We then divide the annual loan payment by these discretionary earnings to calculate the discretionary earnings rate. If that result is less than or equal to 20%, the program passes the debt-to-earnings metric. If the program's annual and discretionary rates exceed both 8% and 20% respectively, then the program fails the debt-to-earnings metric. The earnings premium measure takes the median annual earnings for completers in the cohort, subtracts the earnings threshold, and the result is the program's earnings premium, which represents the difference between the median earnings of graduates versus those with only a high school level education. The program is considered to lead to low earnings if the earnings premium is 0 or negative. Now, if you're curious about these metrics and would like to know more about the details of how they're calculated, I recommend that you check out last year's conference presentation on the topic, Gainful Employment BO6. And in that session, Joe Massman and Greg Martin from the Office of Post-Secondary Education get deep into the weeds about how each component of these metrics are calculated. So let's turn to the primary topic of discussion for today's session. There are two major requirements that apply to schools this year, and the deadline for both of those activities is now January 15th, 2025. Schools are expected to evaluate completers lists provided by the department. These are used to determine which students' earnings will be used in the two metrics, and the evaluation is intended to ensure that we're looking at the earnings for the right students. The other major requirement is to complete FVT GE reporting for all the GE and eligible non-GE programs at your institution, unless they meet the program group exclusion, which I'll describe in just a second. This data will be used for consumer information and to calculate the debt-to-earnings rates for each program. So let's start with the completers lists. For each applicable program, the department will generate completers lists based on the enrollment data that institutions have already reported to NSLDS. The department will assume that those completers lists are correct unless the institution makes corrections, so no action is required unless the institution believes something is incorrect. Evaluating completers lists is a school's opportunity to make sure that all of the data is accurate and that we're capturing the correct students to measure earnings after graduation. This year, institutions will have until January 15, 2025 to review their completers lists and correct any discrepancies in NSLDS. In future years, institutions will be required to evaluate completers lists no later than 60 days after they've received those lists from the department. Now, I want to pause here and mention something that's come up in numerous questions from schools. Many schools believe that they need to evaluate completers lists first in order to know which students must eventually be reported on. But that's not true. The two processes are totally separate. The students included on an institution's completers list will never be the exact same as the students they report on. The department provides a different set of reports that schools will use to identify the students who must be reported on, and Glenn will say more about those reports in a few minutes. But the important point is that you should not use your completers list to decide who to report on. Now let's turn to reporting, which is the more significant of the two requirements. By January 15, 2025, schools will report two types of data to the department: student-specific data and program-specific data. Schools will report on enrolled students, completers, and withdrawals for the most recently completed award year, 23-24, and schools will also report on one or more additional award years for students who completed or withdrew, depending on which reporting option they chose. Schools can choose from two reporting options, standard reporting or transitional reporting, and they can only make that choice once this year. So let's first discuss the transitional reporting method. In order to reduce burden on institutions, the department allows institutions to select transitional reporting for the first 6 years that the regulations are in effect. If schools select this option, they'll only be required to report on the two most recently completed award years rather than several award years in standard reporting, which I'll say more about in a moment. Schools will make this decision once during this reporting cycle, and it cannot be changed. If the school chooses the transitional option, the department will calculate the debt to earnings rates using the earnings from the older group of students and the debt for only the students from the 2 most recently completed award years. Now let's pause to answer a frequently asked question about a school's selection of reporting method. Schools make the choice about transitional or standard reporting methods when they submit the student submittal file to the department. And some schools have asked whether, if they've already submitted the student submittal file and selected, for example, the transitional reporting option, can they decide to switch to the standard reporting option if they resubmit their student submittal file? And the answer is yes, but only if they resubmit their student submittal file with a new reporting selection before the January 15, 2025 deadline for reporting. Schools can resubmit data for either the program or student submittal files until that date and are permitted to change their reporting type before the deadline in their submission. But this is important. After the deadline, the school's reporting choice is locked and cannot be changed for the following 6 years. Now, if a school chooses standard reporting, it will report on completers and withdrawals for several prior award years in addition to the most recently completed award year. For most GE or eligible non-GE programs, schools using standard reporting will report for the 2nd through 7th prior award years, or 17-18 through 22-23. For qualifying graduate programs, schools will report for the 2nd through 8th prior award years, which will also include the 16-17 award year. So now let's turn to some exclusions and exceptions to the FVT GE requirements. We'll start with some exclusions that apply at the institution level. If an institution has a main campus in a U.S. territory or one of the freely associated states, the institution is excluded from all of the gainful employment accountability provisions and most of the financial value transparency requirements, except for the reporting requirements. Now, for these schools, the department will not calculate either of the metrics, but we will calculate and publish median debt and earnings information for their GE and eligible non-GE programs. And one also important note here, this exclusion does not apply to foreign institutions outside the freely associated states or the U.S. territories. All of those institutions are subject to all of the FVT GE requirements, including calculation of both metrics. Now let's discuss a second type of exclusions at the program group level. This is a particularly important exclusion for reporting purposes. The regulations define substantially similar programs as programs with the same 4-digit zip code prefix at any credential level. If one of these groups of substantially similar programs did not produce at least 30 total completers over the 4 most recently completed award years, and for this year that includes 2021 through 23-24, the school is not required to report on any of those programs and none of those programs will be subject to any other FVT GE requirements. But pay careful attention to the second bullet point. There are some groups of substantially similar programs that are right on the cusp of having 30 total completers over the past 4 award years. And if you meet the conditions for the exemption in 1 year, but your program grows and in a subsequent year your program group has over 30 completers in the past 4 award years, then you'll need to go back and report the necessary information for those older award years. So we explain a little bit more detail about how this works in Dear Colleague Letter Gen 2404. Another important thing to note here is that there is no reporting exception for single programs with less than 30 completers in a particular award year. And we've received a lot of questions from schools that are confused about this point, so I want to be very clear about this. You must report on GE or eligible non-GE programs, even if they have less than 30 completers for a given award year, unless they meet this program group exclusion that I'm describing on this slide. Now finally, there are some student exclusions that apply to completers lists. A student is excluded if one or more of the student's direct loans are under consideration for or have been approved for a total and permanent disability discharge. A student will be excluded if they were enrolled full-time in any other eligible program at the same institution or another institution during the calendar year in which earnings were measured, which for this year is 2022. They'll be excluded if they subsequently completed a higher level undergraduate or graduate program at the institution after the cohort period. And just a note, this is distinguished by undergraduate or graduate status. So for example, a student would not be excluded if they subsequently completed a graduate program after completing an undergraduate program, but they would be excluded if they completed a higher level undergraduate program. Students will also be excluded if they're enrolled in an approved prison education program or a comprehensive transition and post-secondary program. And this is something that you'll confirm in your student reporting. This exclusion does include students who were enrolled in the Second Chance Pell Experiment under the Experimental Sites Initiative. And finally, a student is excluded if they've died. That's the last item. So there's an important thing to mention here. These exclusions apply only to completers lists, and students who meet one of these criteria should be clearly listed on your completers list with a note that the student is excluded. These are not exclusions for reporting. You should report on all students in your GE or eligible non-GE programs for the appropriate period, unless they meet the program group exclusion I explained on the prior slide. Okay, now let's turn to an in-depth discussion of some actual data elements you'll be reporting to the department. We won't describe every single data point in detail, but we will identify them and mention items that have proven to be confusing or ambiguous so far. So let's start with the header record for the student submittal file. Here, you'll report some basic information, such as your institution's OPE ID, the submittal date, and the file type. But this is also where you'll report your choice of transitional or standard reporting that we discussed earlier. This year is your one opportunity to make this choice, so we recommend that you carefully consider before selecting one of these options. Now let's turn to what we call the annual amount, or AA detail record. This is what you'll use to report information on students who were enrolled at your institution on June 30th, 2024. You'll report the award year, the basic student identifiers, the zip code, and the credential level for the program in which the student was enrolled, and the published length of the student's program, and the unit of measurement that you used for program length. And then finally, you'll report the total number of weeks of instruction in the program's academic year. Note that you will only report the weeks in the Title IV academic year if the program's length is calculated using weeks or months. So continuing through the AA detail record, we have the program enrollment begin date and the student's enrollment status as of the first day of enrollment in the program, which is one of the traditional NSLDS enrollment statuses, for example, full-time or half-time. And then we have program attendance status during the award year, where for the AA detail record, there's only one valid value of E for enrolled. The next status, program attendance status date, also has only one value that should be reported, which is June 30th. The next status is total cost of attendance for award year being reported, and this is a value that's prompted a lot of questions from the community. This value should include all costs for payment periods that you assign to the award year that you're reporting on, including any costs that have been added to the student's budget through professional judgment. This should not be a generic cost of attendance budget for a particular program. It's intended to be the cost for that particular student. Next is the tuition and fees amount for the award year, and again, you should include tuition and fees for all payment periods assigned to the award year. And finally, we have residency tuition status by state or district. So this will be self-explanatory for schools that charge tuition differently for students that have different residency statuses, but many institutions don't distinguish tuition by residency status. And in these cases, institutions that do not distinguish by residency status should report OS for out-of-state tuition for all of their students. Similarly, some schools may have a unique residency status that is not in-state or out-of-state, for example, a military or overseas status. For students with these statuses, you will also use out-of-state. And here's the last slide for data elements for the AA detail record. The first two items are the allowance for books, supplies, and equipment for the award year, and the allowance for housing and food for the award year. These two items follow the same pattern as the prior two items related to costs for the award year, where you should use the allowance for all payment periods assigned to the award year. The same thing applies to each of the following items on this slide as well. Then we have the institutional grants and scholarships dispersed to the student for the award year. The regulatory definition for this item indicates that an institutional grant or scholarship includes a grant, scholarship, fellowship, discount, or fee waiver. And this may be a complicated item for schools that have foundations or other entities that are involved with an endowment or scholarships. But check out FAQ R9 on the department's website for a detailed explanation of the treatment of these arrangements. Now, the next item is a bit of a catch-all, other state, tribal, or private grants for the award year being reported. The caveat for this one is that schools should not include federal grants or scholarships in this item, including CARES Act or HERF funds that you may have received during the pandemic. And the final item on this page is private loan amount for the award year being reported, which will include all non-Title IV educational loans, including federal, state, and private educational loans dispersed to the student. For this item, you should include any private loans that you include in the student's aid package, since the department already expects schools to include private loans in a student's aid package if it becomes aware of those loans. Now let's turn to another frequently asked question about the AA detail record. This school charges up front for its tuition, fees, books, and supplies, and asks how it should report these items for the award year. That's a great question. And the answer here is that the school should use the same method that it's required to use under the cash management regulations to prorate charges by payment period. For example, if the program has substantially equal payment periods, it would divide the tuition, fees, books, and supplies by the number of payment periods in the program, and then include all the costs for the payment periods that are assigned to the award year. We describe this process in more detail in FAQ R26. Now let's look at another frequently asked question. Another question we've been asked is how to report a currently enrolled student who transfers between majors in the middle of an award year. So in these cases, the school should report the student on the AA detail record only for the program or programs in which the student was enrolled as of June 30th, 2024. Now, in most cases, when a student transfers between majors, the student withdraws from one program, again, defined as a zip code and credential level combination, and enrolls in another. Therefore, in this case, if the student withdrew from the first program during the 23-24 award year, the school should also report a TA detail record, again, for completers or withdrawals, for the program from which the student withdrew. Now here we return to an important concept from earlier regarding how institutions should report award year values for the AA detail record. You should always report costs for all payment periods that your institution assigns to the award year being reported, which for this year is 23-24. As an example, if your institution uses semesters and assigned your summer term to the 23-24 award year as a trailer, then you would include costs for the fall 2023 term, the spring 2024 term, and the summer 2024 term in the value that you report for this item. In contrast, if you treat summer as a header, you'd report costs for summer 23, fall 23, and spring 24 terms when you report for the 23-24 award year. So now let's turn to the data elements that are part of the total amount, or TA detail record, which is used for students who withdraw or complete a program during an award year. Most of the values in this record will reflect total amounts for a student's entire program rather than the amounts for the award year that are used in the AA detail record. As with the AA detail record, you will report the award year, student identifiers, zip code and credential level, the length of the program measurement, and the weeks in the Title IV academic year. But here you'll also report whether the student graduated or withdrew from a comprehensive transition and post-secondary program for students with intellectual disabilities, or an approved prison education program or Second Chance Pell program for incarcerated students. Continuing through the data elements for the TA detail record, we have the date that the student completed or withdrew from the program, which is relatively self-explanatory. And next, we have the total private loans received for enrollment in the program, which includes the total non-Title IV educational loans received by the student, similar to the item on the AA detail record that we discussed earlier. This element is a catch-all for various types of non-Title IV loans, including federal and state loans. This is also the first element on the TA detail record that is treated differently for GE and eligible non-GE programs, where for students enrolled in GE programs, you report only the amount received for the program, but for students enrolled in eligible non-GE programs, you'll report the total amount that the student received for enrollment in all programs at the same credential level. And I'll explain a little bit more about this concept in a few moments. Next, we have the total institutional debt for the program, and this represents the debt that the student owed to the institution after exiting the institution. Now, how you report this item depends on whether the student withdrew or completed the program. For students who completed the program, you'll simply report the debt that the student owed at the time they graduated. But for students who withdrew from the program, you'll use the debt as the deadline for returning funds through the R2G4 process, or 45 days after the date that the institution determines that the student withdrew. So for students who withdraw, keep in mind that you should not include amounts that the student repays after the withdrawal date. You should only include the original amount of debt as of that date. Finally, the last item on this slide is the total tuition and fees for enrollment in the program, which again will be treated differently for students who were enrolled in GE programs and those who were enrolled in eligible non-GE programs. And here we have the final three data elements for the TA detail record. First, we have the total allowance for books, supplies, and equipment for the student's enrollment in the program. This represents the allowance included in the student's cost of attendance for every award year they were enrolled, or a higher amount if assessed by the institution. And again, we see that for GE programs, you'll include in this item only values for the student's enrollment in the program, whereas for eligible non-GE programs, you'll report value for the student's enrollment in all programs at the same credential level. The next item is institutional grants and scholarships for a student's entire enrollment in the program. And this one is, again, calculated a little bit differently depending on whether the student is enrolled in a GE or eligible non-GE program. And finally, we have the program attendance during the award year, where the only valid statuses are G for graduated and W for withdrawn. Now let's take a quick minute to explain in more detail the difference between reporting TA record values for GE programs versus for eligible non-GE programs. Now for GE programs, you'll only report values for the student's enrollment in the program from which they completed or withdrew. And remember, a program is defined as the combination of a zip code and the credential level. But for eligible non-GE programs, you'll report values for the program that the student completed or withdrew from, and also all other programs at the same credential level that the student was enrolled in at the same institution. And this can go back to the 2017-2018 award year, and you shouldn't report values from before that year. So let's look at an example here on this slide of a student who completed an eligible non-GE program. This student completed an associate's degree in accounting that they were enrolled in during the 1920 and 2021 award years. And then at the same institution, the student began enrollment in a bachelor's degree program in finance during the 21-22 award year. Then the next year, the student transferred into a BA in accounting. And finally, in the 23-24 award year, the student transferred into a BA program in business administration. That program was ultimately the one that the student completed. So for this student, the school would include amounts from the student's enrollment from 21-22 through 23-24 in all three of those programs in data elements like total tuition and fees, total institutional grants and scholarships, and total private loans received. The school would not include any amounts from the student's enrollment in the AA program because that is a different credential level from the BA program that the student ultimately graduated from in the 23-24 award year. Now let's pause once more for a question about how to report values for students who complete two separate programs during a particular year. So in this situation, the school charged the student separately for the two programs, and the student received aid separately for those programs. In this situation, where the institution can clearly document the separate charges, aid disbursements, and accounts, the school would be permitted to attribute values for total tuition and fees, total private loans, etc., separately to each program. Now, if the school is unable to clearly distinguish between the two programs with respect to charges and aid disbursements, etc., the school would simply split those values between the two programs that the student completed during the same award year. And with that, I will turn it over to Glenn to discuss the program submittal data elements and take us through the remainder of the session. Glenn?
Thank you, David. Now let's cover the data elements for program submittals, starting with the header record, which will have your school's 6-digit OPID, along with the date the file was created and file type S for submittal file. NSLDS will return an error acknowledgement file with an E in the file type. If the submittal file was not successfully processed due to a file level error, NSLDS will return a file level error file. This next slide shows a few of the fields in the detailed record for program submittals, starting with the award year for which you are reporting program data and the program identifiers for the program you are reporting on. If your school has multiple programs with the same 6-digit zip code and credential level that have different published length of program or weeks in Title IV academic year, report program length or weeks in Title IV academic year that is the longest. Continuing with the detailed record fields, I would like to focus on the qualifying graduate program field today, but the descriptions for all fields are available in Volume 2 of the FVT GE User Guide. Also, you can find more information about program reporting under the FAQ section on the Knowledge Center. In addition, there are slides in this presentation that will cover some frequently asked questions on some of these fields that are displayed on this slide. On the next slide, we will show you how you could determine if a program should be considered a qualifying graduate program. Let's go over the steps for how you could determine if your GE or eligible non-GE program is a qualifying graduate program. First step is Is the program a graduate program with credential level of 05, 06, 07, or 08, in which the student completed or must complete required postgraduate training to enter certain occupational fields? If yes, you'll go to step 2. If no, the program is not a qualifying graduate program and you will report an N in this field. Step 2. If programmatic accreditation is necessary for licensure, is the program programmatically accredited by an accrediting agency that meets state's requirements? If yes, or if program accreditation is not required, you'll go to step 3. But again, if the answer to this question is no, then the program is not a qualifying graduate program and you report an N in this field. Step 3. Is the program's zip code one of the values for qualifying graduate programs as established by the department? You can see FVTG User Guide Volume 2, Appendix D for the list. If yes, you go to the final step, step 4. If no, the program is not a qualifying graduate program and you report an N in the field. Step 4. Based on the institution's record, did at least half of the program's graduates obtain licensure in a state where post-graduation training requirements apply? If yes, this program is a qualifying graduate program and you report a Y in the field. If no, the program is not a qualifying graduate program and you would report an N. Next slide has the remaining detail records for the program submittals. Again, all the descriptions for the fields for program submittal could be found in Volume 2 of the FVT GE User Guide. For now, let's review some key points for program reporting when a zip code and credential level combination has multiple programs. Unique treatment applies when an institution has multiple separate academic programs under the same 6-digit zip code and credential level combination. So if at least one of the eligible programs within a GE or eligible non-GE program is not programmatically accredited, you would report no for the programmatically accredited indicator in the detail record for program reporting. If you would report the program as meeting licensure requirements for a state only if at least one track or concentration of the program allows for meeting licensure requirements in the state. Next, you would indicate that the program is a qualifying graduate program if at least one program within the 6-digit zip code and credential level combination meets the definition, and at least 50% of program graduates obtain licensure in a state where postgraduate training requirements apply. Last, you would report a name for the 6-digit zip code and credential level combination that you feel is most appropriate. Next is a question that schools have asked related to program level reporting. My school is required to provide data on students who attempted and passed the licensure exam for a program to our accrediting agency, but do not have it for the most recently completed award year. What should we report? The answer is you should report the most recent data that you reported to your accrediting agency. If your accrediting agency does not require you to report counts of licensure exam attempts or passes, report a space in both those fields: the count of program graduates who attempted licensure exam and count of program graduates who passed licensure exam. In the next part of the session, we will cover how to report FVT-GE data to NSLDS, the FVT-GE reports, and evaluating your completers list. Before diving into the reporting process on NSLDS, I would like to cover a question that has come up about reporting requirements. Do reporting requirements apply to programs that are no longer active or no longer qualify for Title IV HEA funds? The simple answer is yes. Institutions are expected to report on all programs, including those that have been discontinued or voluntarily withdrawn. The only exceptions are for program groups of substantially similar programs that share the same 4-digit ZIP prefix at any credential level that did not produce at least 30 total completers over the 4 most recently completed award years. Now let's jump into the 3 reporting methods available to schools for submitting FVT-GE program-specific and student-specific data. First, we have the batch submittal process where schools can send their files to NSLDS via SAIG. To utilize this method, schools must enroll in the FVT-GE reporting service on the SAIG enrollment site. The second method is the online option, which allows a school user to add program data or student data on the maintenance page or program page via the NSLDS FAP website. The third method is spreadsheet submittal process, where school users can upload a spreadsheet via the NSLDS FAP website. For both reporting methods via the NSLDS FAP website, the school user must have an active NSLDS user ID with enrollment update for NSLDS online services. Electronic Announcement GE 2405 provides the details and links that institutions need to enroll for batch and/or online services. Next, we have a question related to batch reporting. Should we report all award years in one file or each award year separately in multiple files? Institutions have the flexibility to submit one file with all or multiple award years or report one file per award year. In addition, institutions can report AA detail records and TA detail records in one file or in separate files. Let's review some examples. For School A, this is an example of reporting multiple files for each AA and TA detail records and one award year per file. School A selected standard reporting. So to start, file 1 will have AA detail records for award year 23-24. Then file 2 will have TA records for the first standard reporting award year 17-18. File 3 will continue with award year 18-19, and then files 4 through 8 will have the TA detail records for standard reporting award years 19-20 through the most recently completed award year of 23-24. Please note that if your school has any qualifying graduate programs, there would be a ninth file for award year 16-17. School B is an example of combining AA and TA records in one file, but still submitting separate files for each award year. School B opted for transitional reporting, so file 1 will have both AA and TA detail records for award year 23-24, followed by file 2, which will have the TA records for award year 22-23. School C is an example of combining AA and TA records and multiple award years in one file. So School C has also opted for transitional reporting. So file 1, and the only file, will have all the AA detail records for award year 23-24, along with TA detail records for award years 22-23, 23-24. As a reminder, the annual amount detail record is for schools to report students who are enrolled as of June 30th of the most recently completed award year. Enrolled students have a current certified enrollment status of F, Q, H, L, or A. Another question we received is, for which students do I submit an annual amount record? The answer is schools should report the AA detail record only for students who were enrolled as of June 30th of the most recently completed award year. Let's review a few scenarios. Student A has been full-time since 2020, so an AA record would be submitted for the award year 23-24 because the student was enrolled as of June 30th, 2024. Student B was originally full-time, withdrew, and then re-enrolled as half-time. The school would report an AA record because the student was enrolled as of June 30th, 2024. Student C graduated on August 1st, 2024, but was still full-time as of the end of the most recently completed award year, which is June 30th, 2024. So the school would report an AA record for award year 23-24. Student D graduated prior to the award year ending on June 30th, 2024, and even though the student was enrolled for part of the award year of 23-24, the school would not report an AA record. Actually, the school would submit this student in a TA record for award year 23-24 because the student graduated in that award year. As a reminder, the total amount detail record is for schools to report students who graduated or withdrew in prior award years based on the transitional or standard reporting type selected by your institution in the most recently completed award year. In subsequent years, schools will report students who graduated or withdrew in the most recently completed award year. Now let's move on to questions that we received about who schools should report a TA record if they opted for standard reporting. The TA record for schools that chose standard reporting will contain students that have graduated or withdrawn from the prior award years and the most recently completed award year. The prior award years for standard reporting is 17-18 through 23-24 and also includes 16 and 17 if the program is a qualifying graduate program. Let's go over students C and D. Student C withdrew and then re-enrolled as half-time effective January 10th, 2021. The school would not report a TA record because the student is still enrolled as of June 30th, 2024. The school should report an AA record for the student for award year 23-24. Student D, who was previously withdrawn, re-enrolled as full-time, and then withdrew again. In this scenario, the school should report only one record for award year 23-24 based on the latest withdrawn effective date of March 1st, 2024. On this slide, we have the same question, but for schools that have opted for transitional reporting. For transitional reporting, schools should report students that have graduated or withdrawn from the two most recently completed award years, 22-23 and 23-24. Let's review students A and B. Student A graduated on May 10th, 2023, so the school would report a TA record for award year 22-23. But for student B, who graduated on May 10th, 2022, the school would not provide a TA record because the student graduation date is not within the two most recently completed award years. The last question we will review for FVT GE data reporting is for program level reporting. The question is, how do I determine which students to include when reporting the count of enrolled students in the program? The answer is that schools should report all students that were enrolled in the program during the award year. When determining the total number count of students in the program, the school should include all students, both Title IV recipients and non-Title IV recipients, who were enrolled in the program at any point during the award year, July 1st through June 30th. This may result in some students being counted in multiple programs at the same institution if the student transferred between programs during the award year. Our next section will go over the FVT GE reports. There are 3 reports which schools can request on the NSLDS FAP website to help them with reporting their FVT GE data. The first report is the detailed report and is useful for identifying students enrolled in the most recently completed award year and students that graduated or withdrew during the award years applicable to the chosen reporting type. The second report is a summary report and is useful for identifying programs which had students enrolled in the most recently completed award year and students that graduated or withdrew during the award years applicable to the chosen reporting type. The last report is the no program enrollment report that is useful to identify students which do not have any certified program enrollment data in NSLDS. More about the reports can be found in Electronic Announcement GE04. Schools have asked, how do the FVT GE reports help me identify the students I need to submit FVT GE data for, and which report should I use? So for the AA record, schools would select the FVT GE program detail report with the parameters shown on the slide. First, you select the cohort type, or more commonly referred to as reporting type, followed by selecting award year 23-24, and finally enroll for program attendance status. Once the output of students is produced, the data will need to be reviewed, and schools should only report on students that meet the FVT GE reporting requirements. For example, the student must have received Title IV aid for the program. On the next slide, let's cover the FVT GE enrollment detail report for TA records. Again, you will first select the cohort type. Then you can select all award years or select just one award year depending on your preference. You can select both graduated and withdrawn for the program attendance status, or run a report for graduated and then another one for withdrawn statuses. Same reminder that once the output of students is produced, schools must review the data and determine which students they need to report on for FVT GE reporting. Now that we have covered all the FVT GE data reporting topics, let's move on to the completers list. There are 3 ways to review your completers list. We have the FVT GE draft and final completers list batch files. The draft completers list will be pushed to the TG mailbox the school designated for the FVT GE reporting batch service. If your school did not designate a TG mailbox for FVT GE batch reporting, or signed up after the draft list was pushed to schools, you must request the ad hoc completers list report on the NSLDS FAP website to receive your school's latest run of the completers list. After the correction period, the final completers list will be automatically pushed to schools via SAIG. Next, the school can also review their completers list on the FVT GE completers list page via the NSLDS FAP website. The third option is to request the FVT and GE completers report. This ad hoc version of the report may be requested from the NSLDS reporting tool available via the NSLDS FAP website, and the ad hoc report will return data as of the latest run, which refreshes every 24 hours. Schools can use this report to confirm any updates made to the completers list during the correction period. Schools can also request this report if they did not sign up for FVT GE batch reporting service via SAIG. One of the most common questions received from schools is, are the award years for the FVT GE data reporting that our institution is submitting to NSLDS the same as the award years on the completers list? The answer is no. This table on the slide outlines the completers list will only have students that graduated, and the award years they graduated in depends on if the program is being evaluated for the 2-year cohort period or the 4-year cohort period. There's also a 2-year and 4-year cohort period for qualifying graduate programs indicated by the -Q, but that does not apply this year. The second part of the table displays the attendance statuses and applicable award years for FVT GE data reporting based on the selection of standard reporting or transitional reporting. Another common question is, why hasn't my school received a completers list? A couple of reasons are, for the applicable award years in the 2YP or 4YP cohort period, schools that did not offer any GE or eligible non-GE programs, or if the GE or eligible non-GE programs did not have the necessary number of completers, those schools will not receive an FVT GE completers list. The necessary number of completers is 30 or more after exclusions are applied. If your school has not signed up for the FVT GE batch service, the school will not automatically receive either the draft or final FVT GE completers list from NSLDS. In this instance, schools may request the ad hoc completers list report on NSLDS FAP, or schools can review the completers list data online on the FVT GE completers list page via the NSLDS FAP website. For more information, please refer to Volume 3 of the FVT GE User Guide. If your school did receive a completers list, there are a few ways to update the list if needed. First, the FVT GE completers list page on NSLDS FAP can be used to indicate Comprehensive Transition or Post-Secondary CTP program or Approved Prison Education Program exclusion for a student. And you can also remove a student from the list if Title IV aid was not received for the program. Schools can also use the NSLDS enrollment reporting process to correct program enrollment statuses if a student was not included on the completers list because of graduated enrollment status was not reported to NSLDS, or if a student was included on the list because a graduated enrollment status was reported to NSLDS in error. Next, schools that have chosen standard reporting can use the FVT GE student reporting submittal process to indicate that a student graduated from a CTP or PEP in the detailed TA record. Also, the FVT GE program reporting submittal process must be used for schools to indicate the program needs to be evaluated as a qualifying graduate program on the completers list. The next 4 slides will cover questions and answers related to updating the completers list. First question is, there are graduates on our completers list with no exclusions indicated, but they were in a CTP or a prison education program. How can we update the exclusion? The answer is, during the review correction period, schools can indicate a student graduated from a CTP program or approved PEP on the completers list webpage via the NSLDS FAP website, as we just reviewed in the previous slide. Additionally, schools that selected standard reporting can use a TA record to indicate the student graduated from a CTP program or approved PEP. Note, after the school has successfully submitted the data, the exclusion flag on the completers list will be reflected in the next run of the completers list, usually within 24 hours. Our next question is, why are there students missing from our completers list? There are two reasons the student may have not been included in your completers list. The first being that the student graduated outside of the cohort period for the 2YP or 4YP cohort, depending on how the program was evaluated. Here, no action is needed by the school. The second reason is the graduation status was not successfully certified in NSLDS. The school can use the enrollment reporting process, as mentioned before, to correct the student's program enrollment status. Question 3. There are students on our completers list that did not receive Title IV aid for the program. How can we remove them? Schools can remove these students from their completers list on the FVT GE completers list page via the NSLDS FAB website. Our last question. Our program is a qualifying graduate program, and we were expecting to see graduates from earlier award years. What should we do? First, the school should check that the SIP code for the program is identified under the SIP code list published by the department. Second, if the SIP code is on the department's list and meets the criteria in the 2 bullets listed on the slide, the school can confirm the program is a qualifying graduate program via FVT GE program reporting. Our last slide covers resources that are available to help you with the FVT GE process. Thank you. This concludes the FVT GE session.